JB Knowledge Podcast Network. On episode 5 of the InsurTech Geek Podcast, talking InsurTech Connect and the history and disruption of insurance with Caribou Honig, chairman and co-founder at InsurTech Connect. The InsurTech Geek Podcast, powered by JB Knowledge, is all about technology that's transforming and disrupting the insurance world. We'll be interviewing guests and doing deep dives with our own research and development team into technology that we see changing this industry. We're taking you on a journey through insurance tech, so enjoy the ride and geek out. Today, we're excited to be talking with Caribou Honig. Caribou is the chairman and co-founder of the InsureTech Connect Conference, among many other things that we're actually going to talk about. Caribou, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Man, we're thrilled to have you on the podcast. It's, I'm a super geek. I love all things tech, all things insurance, and I love a good conference. I've gotten to speak at over 400 conferences in the last 12 years, and absolutely love a good get together. There's amazing energy and amazing connections that happen at these things. And we're going to talk about the awesome energy that is going to take place in a couple of weeks at InsurTech Connect in a minute. But before we do that, Caribou, I would love to just talk about you. You're one of the people behind InsurTech. And I want to talk about just your background. You know, where are you born and raised? I know you're joining us from Richmond, Virginia today, correct?
That's right. That's where I live.
Awesome. And you've been there for a while, but let's go way back into time and talk about, you know, where are you born and raised? Where'd you go study? What'd you study? And what landed you in this space as an influencer and key player in the InsurTech space?
So the fabulous life of Caribou Honig is what you're asking for.
Absolutely, like. Including how did you get an epic name like Caribou?
Okay. So we'll go way back to the beginning. You have to go back about 50 years now. And my folks were driving up to Quebec on a road trip. They stopped overnight in the town of northern Maine. The town of Caribou, Maine. And I'm named, apparently, the story goes, after the town where I was conceived.
Yes.
Now, if you like that, this being a road trip, the standard joke is I'm lucky not to be named Buick.
Exactly. Or Ford or Mustang.
Yeah.
Or something.
So much worse on so many different dimensions.
Exactly. But that's awesome. I mean, first off, a road trip to Quebec is always going to be fun. And the food's going to be great because Quebec knows food. And right. Number two, you end up with an epic name for the rest of your life. So
exactly.
Now, where did you end up growing up?
So I grew up in upstate New York, outside of Albany.
Nice.
When I was first growing up, we had about 90 acres and 2 cows. It was actually a very formative time for me, as you'd expect.
That's a lot of land per cow.
It is a lot of land per cow. It's actually really a neat way to grow up. And the flip side of it is I like to say I never really developed natural social skills. So any social skills I have, I kind of learned a little bit more cognitively. But so it was a little isolating at times, but it was also great as I, named the grasshoppers that were going by and played a lot with the grass and the nature and stuff like that. So now that we got that out of the way, so I grew up in upstate New York. Went to Harvard undergrad, studied physics and philosophy, went from there to University of Virginia for law and business.
I got to pause you. I have to pause you for a second.
All right. Because
you studied 2 very different disciplines. And I went to an engineering high school in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I grew up. And I took 4 years of college level computer science in high school. That was like what our whole high school was about. And my computer science teacher was actually an undergrad and master's graduate in philosophy. So half of my computer science education was philosophy. And I find it fascinating that you spent time both in physics and philosophy because they're not perceptibly connected, but they absolutely are intertwined. And that must have been a great foundational education for you to study those 2 disciplines.
I like your choice of word there, foundational. I tend to approach problems from first principles, right? Which sometimes slows me down because there's a whole lot of second principles, derived principles that can be very effective for problem solving. But I like to get to the root base of these things. And physics, I think of as the root base, the first principles study for the sciences. And I think of philosophy as really that first principles look at humanities. So where I see them tied together is I just have this appetite for understanding things at the first principles level. Again, sometimes it slows me down. Sometimes it has me asking questions that are a little bit off the beaten path, but it's what I enjoy.
My computer science teacher, because he was obsessed with opening our minds way outside of computational sciences, he made me watch a movie that really unhinged my brain called Mind Walk. Do you remember this movie?
I can't say that I've seen that one.
It was based on a book called The Turning Point, which is a nonfiction book by Fritjof Capra, who also authored The Tao of Physics. And Mind Walk is a movie that first off, I strongly encourage you to go watch it. It's a combination of physics and philosophy. The whole movie is about the philosophy of physics and of space, but it really opened my brain on thinking and problem solving and questioning the nature of reality, which really helps when you're trying to solve business problems and problems of whether they're of business or of industry. Right, is to have like a foundational way, like you just described, of approaching problems.
That's right. It really helps you untangle what's causing what,
Yeah.
and then how do we model that out?
Yeah.
Right? The philosophy piece is a lot of actual, like, what is the root cause? And then the physics is great training for modeling, for building a mental model about how the world might work.
Yeah, which is critical to looking at a really old, established, well-moneyed industry like insurance and saying, how do we upend this? Right? Like how do we dramatically improve something
Exactly.
this big and this complex? Now, you, after Harvard, you went to one of my favorite combo programs. You got a JD MBA from University of Virginia in one of my favorite cities in America, Charlottesville.
Yeah, it was a really great education and a great time, and a good way to sort of bridge myself from that abstract physics and philosophy into some practical applications, let's say.
Yeah, that's an understatement, right? I mean, so ZIMP, like, can we talk about that on here, or is that just taboo when we talk about? I remember that when I went there, the no answer. That means we're not talking about it. I love all the secret societies at UVA. I think it's fascinating. And of course, you were there. Oh my goodness. You were at UVA, maybe right at the tail end of when Dave Matthews was playing in the bars there.
Yes, and unfortunately, I don't think that I crossed paths there. It's one of those things where, in hindsight, I realized, oh my gosh, I was a little bit more insular than I should have been. But yeah, there's a few haunts that eventually I discovered where apparently he was in his prime.
Quite active. Yeah, that's awesome. So walk me through, MBA, law degree, Harvard undergrad. What happened professionally between that and now that led you into InsurTech?
Yeah, I like to say I've really had three acts in my professional career. First act, coming out of grad school, was going to Capital One, the big credit card issuer and bank. And I went there in 1996. And although most people today probably know Capital One as a big, successful bank, at the time, it was really a disruptor. And it had, maybe 1,200 employees when I started. By the time I left 10 years later, it had about 20,000. So we really went through hypergrowth, which opened my eyes, taught me a few lessons unto itself. Um, I took a year off after a decade at Capital One, having a really nice run of it. Watched Netflix, played with my children, and listened to the universe. It was productive, and fortunately, the universe spoke to me. I reconnected with a couple other former Capital One executives, and we ended up creating a small boutique venture capital firm, trying to help another generation of startups take the lessons and battle scars we had developed from our time at Capital One, deploying data and information business strategies to the next generation. So that was a firm, QED Investors, a great firm, had an amazing time there. As we grew, we added a few partners. We started to specialize a bit at the individual partner level. And in 2015, I like to say it smelled like there was something really interesting about to happen in InsurTech. We'd already made a couple InsurTech investments by that time, but it seemed like there was an inflection point about to happen. So I started to focus most of my neurons on the InsurTech space. As part of that, I was looking around for a good industry conference where I could talk to other investors interested in this space, talk to the entrepreneurs building the next generation of interesting things, talk to the innovation executives from within the industry. Couldn't really find any good conference like that. So I had the harebrained idea that since I needed this to exist for my day job, maybe I should just create it. Lucky for me, I got connected with a fellow, Jay Weintraub, who actually knew what he was doing when it comes to trying to build an industry conference like that. And we were able to collaborate and pull together InsureTech Connect. I had so much fun doing that I went from my second act of the venture capital side to now what I call my third act, which is really a mix of different interesting activities, all pointed towards helping innovation, quite frankly, helping good people succeed at doing interesting things. So I continue to help grow the conference where I can. I work with the same team actually to create another industry conference called HR Transform, focused on the impact of technology on the workplace and the future of work. I'm on a few startup independent director board positions. Became a special advisor to a small boutique VC firm focused on HR tech, future of work investments. And I like to say, besides that, I mostly just spend my time talking to people and being a nuisance.
Yeah, and that's being a nuisance can actually be a really good thing. It just depends on, I guess, your perspective, right? And what the end aim is. I've prided myself on being a nuisance in many cases. I served on city council here in College Station, Texas, for 6 years, and was one of the few people elected that actually understood risk management, insurance, and technology, and embarked on a whole bunch of things where I think quite a few people considered me a nuisance, but I was working pretty hard to try and modernize their risk management, and really look at, because a city carries an enormous amount of risk. It's astounding how much risk they carry, right? A city like College Station, Texas, has 117,000 people, now 121,000. Sorry, but annual budget of $365 million. In my 6 years running the budget committee, we authorized $2 billion of spending. And it was just amazing how much risk we carried. The size of risk and the frequency of incidents was pretty astounding. And often with good intent, being a nuisance can result in some great things. It looks like that's been the result with InsurTech Connect. Is this has grown into quite a deal.
It's always very rewarding to see something that you put your heart and soul into doing well and succeeding, and being something that people value. So we started out. The first event was October of 2016, which isn't really that long ago now, and we had about 1,500 people attend, which surprised us. Quite frankly, it was actually standing room only. We were worried about whether the fire marshal
Yep.
might come in and complain. But we clearly saw that we tapped into something. And one of the most rewarding experiences of my whole career still, I recall taking 100 paces back during lunchtime, and you just sort of see 500 conversations happening, right, among the people who were there. Most of those conversations would not have happened but for our pulling this together. So that was just very gratifying for me. We had 3,500 people the next year, then 5,500 people the following year. And this year, I'd say we're on track. It's just a couple weeks away. This year, we're on track for about 7,500 people to attend.
Good Lord. I've spoken at a lot of conferences and a lot of events, and I've also run a lot of my own. That is a huge scale. It also puts you into a different scale on just the conference facilities you have to book for something that big.
Yeah, some people like Las Vegas where we hold it. Some people don't like Las Vegas, right? Personal preference. But the truth is, there's only a handful of cities that have the infrastructure to support something like that, and there's only a handful of venues within those cities that can really support it properly. So we've been happy with Las Vegas as a
Yeah.
place for it.
Yeah, well, it's either
Yeah.
It's really Vegas or Orlando at that point. I mean, you really don't have many choices. But what's also telling, and what I'm excited about with InsureTech Connect this year, is you've got people like the co-CEO of Markel Corporation. You've got the president of Allstate Personal Lines. You've got the exec chairman of Lennar Corporation. You've got the chairman and CEO of Star Insurance. You've got the co-founder of Recode. I mean, this is a who's who list in the insurance space. The director of business risk and insurance at Google. I can keep going on the list of just the presenters and people that are going to be presenting and speaking here, much less the attendee list, which is also a list of heavy hitters. So there's a lot of connections being made. I would imagine there's a lot of deals being funded at this conference as well, though.
I like to say that I really want this to be an event where business gets done. Right? At the beginning of this podcast, you said you really like conferences. I think you're maybe not unique, but unusual in that regard. I think a lot of people actually dread conferences. And part of my commitment when we started this thing was I only want to be involved in helping create a conference that I actually want to go to.
Amen.
And and what does that mean? Right? It's not about making a boondoggle. Right? I don't want to take time away from my family to go to a boondoggle. Right? I'd rather go on boondoggles with my family.
Yep.
I want to make something where business is actually getting done. And that can take the form of people, coming up to speed, people consuming the content that we have on stage. And it's important then that we have luminaries on stage, like you point out. But it's also about helping people to have the conversations they want with people who they already know they want to meet with, right, and try to move deals forward. And the serendipity of meeting people that you don't know yet, and you don't even know that you want to meet them yet, but it turns out you do. Right? And that serendipity actually is very powerful. There's a whole set of anecdotes we collect around people meeting at ITC, and a business deal actually happens as a result of it. And again, that's very gratifying for me. Like, if I'm going to spend time helping to create this thing, I want it to actually be moving people's agendas forward, and in that way, like, maybe helping move the industry forward.
So that's a wonderful segue. Let's talk about the industry. Why insurance? Why, obviously you spent a lot of time in the financial services space with Capital One, and you had to peel back the onion, and it's kind of hard to spend time in financial services, not touch the insurance space heavily, right? Because there's just so much, they're so intertwined, right? But why insurance? Why tech applied to insurance? Why does it matter?
Yeah. So I'll start with a little bit of why I'm involved here. And there's a few reasons. One is, from a skills perspective and a mental model perspective, having spent, close to 20 years on the banking side of the world and fintech investing and all, I don't actually believe I know all the answers about how InsurTech is going to play out. What I do believe I know from my time on the banking and fintech side is I do know most of the right questions to ask, and that's 2/3 of the battle typically. And so I actually quite enjoy the learning experience of saying, okay, I think I know the right questions, but I'm going to learn a whole new set of answers that are novel to me at least, and I enjoy that learning piece of it. I also really like insurance as a product, as a good for people and society. I like to joke. You never hear anyone say, "Oh, I am just up to my eyeballs in insurance," or "I'm on such an insurance treadmill that I just can't get off." Like, it's rare that people are truly overinsured in a bad way. Right? It's rare that people have been oversold on insurance. That makes it actually a very good product, and I really quite like being involved in helping move an industry forward that has such a fundamentally good product for people, for the consumers of it. Now, at the industry level, right, when you say, why InsurTech, why now? I mean, that's one of the questions too. And my answer to that is there's this whole pent up set of technologies ready to be deployed, waiting. It's like water behind the dam, and it's finally bursting enough to get out. And I can point to not just like the web, right, and the internet, which, by the way, in my view, was plenty strong to really transform banking, but actually did not transform the insurance sector. It took not just the internet and the web, but also smartphone penetration being near universal and cloud computing becoming now finally mature for the enterprise to use. And drones, as an example, like there's all these technologies that are ready to be deployed and are actually quite powerful for an information business like insurance. So I think that's what's pushing things to be in the last few years really ready for InsurTech to have an impact.
Mm. Yeah, I speak a lot and have spoken a lot about the convergence of a suite of technologies that once they arrived simultaneously allowed for products to be developed that were much bigger than the sum of the parts. So if you look at the miniaturization of imaging, cameras, imaging sensors, the dramatic increases in speed of wireless chips, whether they're cellular, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. You look at the miniaturization of gyros and accelerometers and the sensor arrays. Then the proliferation of multi-gig fiber internet, robotics, significant advances in software where machine learning is available to the masses, and then developments of the cloud. All of that happened concurrently over the last 3 decades. Well, of course, it has foundations that go back way more than 3 decades. But in the last few years, we've been witnessing it. And I've been in business for 18 years now, just under 20 years. And I've been writing software since 1991. So I've been really able to witness this happening. And it's really amazing now what can be developed in the timeline it can be developed in. Just blows away previous standards of software development and hardware development life cycles, because you're standing on the shoulders of giants and you're able to lease this technology in fractions of an hour now through cloud leasing and even equipment leasing. It's just the barriers to entry are lower. The technology that's available is higher. And you've got this ancient industry in insurance that's just ripe for change. And you have a whole suite of technologies that have arrived simultaneously to make it possible.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've been nerding out on cost curves lately. Right, looking at, okay, so you got Moore's law on computational power, but then there's all these other places where the same kind of exponential cost curves are improving, and when it starts to give you a crystal ball, and I kind of know where the cost of this is going to be in 5 years, give or take. Now, what's the business implication of that? One of my favorites actually is in the life sciences part of the world, sequencing the human genome, which has actually fallen faster than the Moore's law price of a transistor. But for the health and life insurance world, I think that starts to have a whole bunch of implications, not just from a technology perspective, but actually from an underwriting and even a business model perspective, perhaps.
Yeah, the cost of, you think about how critical storage is in computation, right? It's critical. The cost of storing a gigabyte 20 to 25 years ago was $500. It's now less than a penny. It far outstrips Moore's law. It's not like the cost curves for the cost of transistors and the cost of storage and the cost of a gigabit per second of bandwidth are astonishing, and they are truly exponential at this point. And Peter Diamandis, who I'm sure you're familiar with, talks about this a lot in promoting abundance theory and recognizing that the now and the future are more abundant than any news agency would like you to believe. Of course, the popular, if you could call it theology, is that, the golden era was that of our grandparents, and things have gotten worse and life is less prosperous and things are going to continue to get harder. And, there's a lot of people who make a lot of money on fear mongering. The reality is we work fewer hours with higher output for far less cost. I mean, there's the productivity curves are outrageous, and the amount of free time that we have, and the amount of innovation in technology, and the cost of technology. There was a really fascinating chart I saw once, Caribou, on the price of a lumen of lighting. And it started in the year 1300 when you had to use whale oil for this, and it used to be outrageously expensive, a severe luxury to light things. And of course, now it's so low that it's hard to even compute. Um, but that was a key driver in learning because people could read when it's dark. There's just all of this has been happening, and insurance to me is a fascinating industry because of its history. I mean, the first I'm not sure how deep you've gone into the history of insurance, but the very very first insurance contracts are about as old as society itself. They used to be called bottomry contracts. The ancient merchants of Babylon used these. This was not kidding, 6,000 years ago. And they they would be a loan that if the ship was lost at sea, the loan didn't have to be repaid, and the interest on the loan amount covered the insurance risk.
Fascinating.
And that's
I've run across a few other sort of archaic, perhaps, insurance forms in terms. I think my favorite is a tontine, which if I try to define, I'll probably mess up. But folks I'm sure can Google what is a tontine.
Yeah,
and it's a really fascinating archaic insurance contract.
Yeah, and what this says though is that the ability to share risk is fundamental to being able to operate as a society. So if it's that, if it co-developed with society, this must be an important problem for you and me to be involved in, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, which means this can be fundamental to the establishing the next generation of society. So let's talk about the future then, Caribou. You're running arguably the largest insurance technology gathering out there, and with some great people co-founding and co-running. I know there's some. I don't want to take away from the other people that are involved in the event, because I know you have a lot of staff that drive it too. What do you see next? Like, what's on the horizon from an insurance technology perspective? What's the hottest stuff you see right now, and then what's the hottest stuff you see coming next?
So there's a few technologies that are having an impact right now. I am most obsessed with APIs, right? The automated programming interfaces, the glue that connects different systems together in a kind of modular, standardized way. And APIs have had a big impact on the banking side of the world. I think there's thousands of APIs now publicly available for people to use. And I think it probably runs in the dozens or maybe 100 in insurance. But the shift of the insurance technology stack to an API approach, I actually think is very impactful for the industry structure. Even right, it's not a technology strategy. I like to say it's actually a business strategy masquerading as a technology strategy when you build your business around APIs. Because it means that you can start to assemble the best in class solutions. It means that you're not trying to integrate anymore. You're just making use of other companies' capabilities through an API, which is usually taking a ton of friction out of the system. And then I think it's now starting to give rise to another key trend. Uh, I've begun to see it called embedded insurance or invisible insurance, but where an insurance provider attaches their product, either as a separate purchase or not, into someone else's product or someone else's customer experience, customer flow. And you can think about this, and it's actually been around in various forms before. If you think about, you're in line at Best Buy, and the cashier offers you a product warranty. Right, that's embedded insurance. You can, if you're buying a ticket on Expedia and they're offering you travel protection, right, that's embedded insurance. But those usually require some sort of actual integration, and so there's a big friction. It's a big biz dev conversation, and APIs are now allowing that to be much more fluid, much lower obstacle to even trying out. Hey, maybe your customers would like to buy our insurance. So I think you're going to start seeing this embedded insurance notion proliferate all over the place, and that in turn is, I think, because of APIs.
Now, let me pause you before you jump into AI. APIs are really important. I'm also seeing a proliferation of RPA bots that are scraping systems when APIs don't exist. I'm seeing it all over the place in insurance. Carriers, TPAs, brokers are using tools like UiPath to build RPA bots that just log into systems when the system doesn't have an API.
Yeah, and I think there's so much value in being able to connect systems
Yep.
that jumping to a sort of middle state until the end state is ultimately available makes sense. It still makes good economic sense.
Yeah.
This is the difference, though, between what an InsurTech startup, which is really starting with a clean slate, building out its technology stack, building out its platform, and an existing incumbent carrier or broker has to deal with. Right, the incumbent has a successful big business. Right, that's a great thing, but it's also sometimes hamstrings them in that they can't just sort of rebuild it and rebuild it with the most modern sort of tech stack approach. They've got to invest in the sort of mid states, and that'll create a ton of value for them. But there is an additional layer of flexibility and efficiency that I might argue that the startups working with a clean slate are able to achieve. That's better still.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I interrupted you before you were continuing about AI. I'm assuming that's what you were headed towards.
That's where I was going. And when you ask me what's going to become the hottest technology, obviously AI has already become important today. It's not something to be ignored. If you give me a choice of acronyms, I lean towards API in the short to medium term, and then AI in the medium to long term in terms of impact.
Yep.
And I think there's really interesting examples where, back to your sort of compounding benefits of these technologies, think about the proliferation now of satellite imagery of rooftops. Terrific. But there's so much satellite imagery of rooftops that it's actually really hard to ask humans to process all of it where in places where you'd want to. And that might be where AI, or I prefer the term machine intelligence, can start to actually filter through and scan for it. In some cases, maybe even better than humans can, even aside from the fact that they can do it in greater volume, cheaper, and 24/7. So I think that AI or machine intelligence, as it continues to mature and improve better and better, and I don't mean some sort of general intelligence. I like to use the analog of the Terminator. I don't think we're anywhere close to having Arnold pop in the insurance world. But I do think that focused white collar tasks can actually be offloaded quite often now.
Yeah, we're seeing it happen more and more, and they're using deep learning tools and machine learning, and general AI. Ray Kurzweil, Peter Diamandis, they estimate 25 to 35 years for general AI to really become practical. And that's assuming a lot of things happen, right? What we're seeing right now is specific forms of AI, like deep learning, machine learning, image recognition, NLP, natural language processing, that are being used to kind of uncork these gigantic reservoirs of data, to use the technical term, giant lakes of data, right? That have existed in unstructured format for so long that we've never tapped into. I mean, we've been doing a lot of experiments with claim file notes because there's just terabytes and even exabytes of data locked up in these free text notes that humans don't have time to process. And it's amazing the results you get in analyzing the likelihood of a claim to be really expensive when you can tap into the free text that's typed in there. It's pretty astounding. But
I was on the venture capital side when big data was the buzzword of the day. And I think that, when was that, 5-6 years ago?
Yep.
Big data was overhyped to the point where I ended up publishing an article in defense of small data. But I do think that when you marry big data sets and some of this machine intelligence, that's kind of what was missing from enabling big data to live up to its hype.
Because there was no possible way to do anything with these giant piles of data unless you had a machine peeling through it 24/7,
Right.
Or a million machines peeling through it, to be more to be more realistic. Something has happened recently, the last few years, that I'd be interested in your take on. And it's not something I would have expected this early in the cycle, but it's happened, so we got to talk about it. Software guys, backed by technology VCs and private equity groups, have decided to not just start InsurTech companies that are vendors for the insurance space, but to go ahead and carry risk themselves and become insurance companies that at their core are tech firms. And it's been interesting to see these come around because typically when, let's say we were talking about insurance tech 8 years ago, you were thinking, okay, well, you're starting a software company. That software company is going to build technology. They're going to then license that technology to a bunch of traditional carriers, brokers, TPAs, pharmacy benefit management companies, et cetera, yada, yada, yada. They're going to license it. They're going to use it to improve profits at their company. And now we've seen a whole crop of companies coming up that said, you know what, we're software guys, we're technology guys, but instead of selling to the insurance business, we're going to go ahead and compete against them. And we're going to go ahead and carry risk. And we'll use reinsurance, we'll do all these other things. But they ended up hiring, instead of working for the insurance companies, they ended up hiring experienced insurance executives, bringing them over to a tech company, and they started carrying risk. I mean, we could talk about a lot of examples, but one that immediately comes to mind is Lemonade, right? Where these are fundamentally technologists that hired insurance folks, started carrying risk, and then built an insurance company with the heart of a tech firm. What are your thoughts on this advent of true, InsurTech companies that aren't just tech vendors but are actually carrying risk?
It's a big topic that you're teeing up there, and I like to describe it as, particularly when an insurance carrier or reinsurer talks to a startup, one of the first questions they both need to ask is, well, are you trying to be part of my supply chain, or are you trying to ask me to be part of your supply chain? Look, I think that there is value in the InsurTechs who are really B2B companies building that technology to make the insurers or the brokers more effective, more efficient. I think that some great companies are being built, going to be built there. And by the way, having invested in a few companies like that in the past, up until recently, I will say it's been a very slow, difficult slog doing that biz dev to the insurance companies. Right? Insurance companies have a time scale that is different than the time scale where those kinds of B2B InsurTechs need to operate. Right? If you go from a first conversation to a pilot in 6 months, and pilot to a rollout in another year after that, the insurance company might feel like they're moving at a pretty good clip, and the startup might feel like they're bleeding capital every day that they're waiting for it to go through. And that may have actually been part of the motivation why some of the startups said, well, we could build this software and sell it to the carriers, but it's just going to be so slow. We might actually be a lot faster if we apply the software ourselves and learn these other skills around things like distribution and risk and so on. I think that there's a quote from a Netflix executive that I've used liberally, I've stolen liberally, around Netflix asking, does HBO become Netflix faster than Netflix becomes HBO? Which business model sort of can adapt the competencies of the other business faster?
Yep.
And so I think in some ways it's a question of to what extent can the insurance companies embrace the kind of innovation mindset and replace their tech stack. What kind of pace can they do that? What kind of speed can they do that? Can they do that faster than the software guys and gals out there building the customer-facing InsurTech startups can build the risk and distribution competencies that they need to augment their technology competencies. Now, and it's not binary. It's not either or. There will be winners and losers in every category here, I believe. I do think that we'll have to look closely at the same key metrics that tell us whether a traditional insurance company is succeeding, combined ratio, loss ratio, things like that. Those things matter for the customer-facing ones too, right? But that's for the customer-facing InsurTech startups as well. I think there's some great ones being built among the software people. And look, I think there's some really interesting, century-old incumbents that are actually leaning into the opportunities presented by technology quite well.
Yeah, to me, it's a fascinating foot race, and it is not a slow foot race. What's going on right now is the same thing that you're seeing in many other industries. And I love your Netflix quote because it does describe this challenge. Who can adopt quicker? Can the tech guys learn insurance faster than the insurance guys can learn tech? And and not just learn, adopt, and roll out, right? And then ultimately, can they solve the needs of the market faster?
And I'd also, be mindful that it's not binary just between
Nope.
the insurance incumbents and the insurtechs. There's a third category out there, which are these tech titans, right? Whether it's the Googles and Alibabas and Tencents, or some of the fintech folks who have been very successful. I'm biased, but Credit Karma is very near and dear to my heart. At InsureTech Connect last year, Ken Lin, the CEO of Credit Karma, announced his sort of one-click multi-quote on auto insurance available to his 5 million customers who not only were getting their credit score from Credit Karma, but also were getting monitoring of their car value. And he's got 80 million customers overall, something like that. Like the when you get these tech titans who bring many of the strengths already around the technology, the modern technology stack, the innovation mindset, and have the resources that are on par with a 100-year-old insurance incumbent.
Yep.
Well, that makes a very formidable competitor.
It does, and it's difficult. I mean, the barriers to entry and the risk space can be high, right? I mean, you've got to have a lot of capital and a lot of experience, and you have to have some seasoning to be able to recognize risk. There's got to be something there, right? And so you're seeing a hybrid approach in some cases, and I agree with you. It's completely not binary. This is not a simple either or statement. But it will be fascinating to witness the outcome, and of course for all of us who are involved in the space, either from an investment perspective or a development perspective or both, to see what happens. I think in the end, one of the beauties of capitalism, those in the end who can provide the most value to the customer, most likely will prevail. But at the end, the customer will most likely win. They'll get a better product delivered faster, most likely for a better price. And it's going to, at least that's what we're seeing right now. I mean, just take my drone insurance. I'm a commercial drone pilot. I'm a commercial pilot as well. I fly airplanes, I fly drones, and the difference in how I have to buy insurance on my airplane to how I have to buy insurance on my drones is staggering. One is a very antiquated process for aviation, and one is very, very modern with drones. I buy drone insurance by the hour and by the location. I use Verifly, and it's integrated with Drone Deploy. I buy the insurance for an hour for a 1 mile radius, and then I go fly for that good job, and then I'm done. And I was fully insured, but I don't need insurance, so I'm not flying it. And boy, airplane insurance is not the same way. But it is really, really fascinating to see on the consumer perspective how much better certain experiences are getting, and of course the price and cost impact of that. So
I believe what's so interesting about that example, by the way, I know Verifly, and I believe last time I checked that Markel, the commercial insurer in my hometown now of Richmond, Virginia, is actually providing the paper for it.
Yep.
Sort of kudos to Markel for partnering with a startup, and kudos to Verifly for partnering with an incumbent.
Yeah.
In a way that actually enables new product that, in theory, I suppose they could each, eventually get to on their own, but in practice, it's greatly accelerated to the benefit of you, the insured, that they're working together.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, let's wrap this conversation up with InsureTech Connect. Just a reminder to everybody, if they haven't registered yet and they still want to go to this, it's September 23rd to 25th at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Website is InsureTechConnect.com. Do you have any final comments for those listening out there that may want to attend the conference?
I'd say it's going to be a place where you can see things that you won't see elsewhere. It's actually got a very international aspect to it. And I think so much of the innovation happening in InsureTech is not limited to just the US. I think there's great benefits you can get from that perspective. We've made it so it's a conference that I want to go to. And there aren't many like that. So I hope it's a conference that other people want to go to as well.
That's awesome. Well, cannot thank you enough for jumping on the show with us. Caribou Honig, you are a fascinating discussion, and I really appreciate your time and you sharing your brain space with us.
Well, it's really been my pleasure. I appreciate you having me with you.
All right. Thanks, Caribou. The InsurTech Geek Podcast, powered by JB Knowledge, is all about technology that's transforming and disrupting the insurance world. I've been your host, James Benham. I've been joined by Caribou Honig. It's been an awesome show. Thanks for joining us this week, and I look forward to talking with you soon. Remember, we're taking you on a journey through insurance tech, so enjoy the ride and geek out.